Hello everyone. Our today's topic of conversation is the greatest woman poet of America, Emily Dickinson, whose complete name is Emily Elizabeth Dickinson. She was born on 10th of December 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts. Amherst, Amherst, Massachusetts, Massachusetts. See, generally we see the poetess or the woman writer. Most of the times they belong to a family where patriarchy is at the peak. You can take example of Bronte sisters in England. We can talk of the family life of Jane Austen, the writer of Pride and Prejudice. Here we have the greatest woman poet of America. And when we talk of her family, it was patriarchal. Her community, moralistic and Puritan. So you can understand, these three words can make you understand how one feels with these all approaches in one's life when one is expected to follow patriarchy, morality and Puritan. They are more infamous than becoming famous because of their orthodoxical approaches most of the times. Her father was elected to Congress. Congress, as we have parliaments here in India, they call it Congress in USA. So he was elected to Congress, and as you know, the capital city of United States of America is Washington DC. So Dickinson followed her father, accompanied her father to Washington. She had both kind of friends, friends of both the genders, men as well as women. Her men friends served her, means they were in connection with her as tutors, intellectual guides and literary advisors. So one can say that her company ultimately led her to this kind of habit of writing. In her women friend list, one is to be noted. Her name was Helen Hunt Jackson. Helen Hunt Jackson. She was an author. As you know, Jane Austen, she also never married. The similar manner we have here. This poetess Dickinson, she never married and lived at home all her life. See, when we talk of marriage, in the context of these poetess or women writers, we don't find a normal married life with them. As you know, Dickinson, Jane Austen, they never married. When you talk of Sylvia Plath, she married to Ted Hugh. But we don't find her life normal, married life normal. When we talk of Amrita Pritam here in India, she also married to some Pritam, and that's why she wrote Pritam always throughout her life after her name, and she became Amrita Pritam. But her married life was not that much okay, so she had to disconnect herself from her husband, and ultimately she was in love with Sahir Ludhianvi, and in the later period of her life she lived with Imrose. All I want to say is that when we develop very high at the intellectual level, most of the times we don't want to be constrained with, we don't want to be hurdled with so-called moral notions of the society, so-called moral responsibilities of the societies. See, Elizabeth Barrett Browning can be taken as an exception. The wife of Robert Browning. Even when you talk of Mary Shelley, the wife of P.B. Shelley, they were not having that much good married life. Okay, let's come to the point of Emily Dickinson. She began writing poems during her 20s, as we have here in India. Sarojini Naidu. She began composing poems at the age of 13. We have one great poetess, Toru Datta. She wrote whatever she could write before leaving this earth at the age of nearly 26. So it means she completed everything that she had to in her 20s. Toru Datta. Here we have Dickinson. She lived for nearly 56 years, from 1830 to 1886. She began writing poems during her 20s, and her poetic output became very large. during her 30s. See, again, we can talk of Kamla Suraya, Kamla Das. Her married life was also not that much okay, and she had to struggle with her identity even in the later phase, in the later time of her life. Dickinson's poems number about 1800. 1800. That's not a very low count. It matters. 1800. Many of which she left in incomplete form, as generally is the case of the poet and poetess. They don't always complete their writing. She made little effort to publish her poems during her lifetime. Means she was not that much interested. She was writing for her own sake, for the sake of writing, not for the sake of publishing and for the sake of reading. A complete, and that's why we find several editions and publications time to time, but not completely. But here I'm talking of the complete and scholarly edition that was published in 3 volumes in 1955. The year is very easily remembered, can be very easily remembered. See, when you talk of Walt Whitman, his masterpiece Leaves of the Grass was published in 1855. So exactly 100 years later, in 1955, we have a complete and scholarly edition of Dickinson's poems was published in 1955 in 3 volumes with the title Poems of Emily Dickinson. This was the title of the 3 volumes poetry, Poems of Emily Dickinson, and was edited by Thomas H. Johnson from Harvard Press. She also wrote several letters, and that's why we have a compilation of her letters also by the same editor. The Letters of Emily Dickinson, the name of the title of that collection of the letters is The Letters of Emily Dickinson, and it was also in 3 volumes by the same person, means edited by Thomas Johnson, and appeared 3 years later, means in 1958. When we talk of her poems, we can talk of several things, but now I'm focusing just some points on it. In it, they were unique to her era. Of course, she belonged to 19th century, but in their style and form, her poems have close affinities with the 20th century. So she started writing something that is going to be existed, that was not there in her era, but that we find in the later era, in the later phase. Even when you will see the anthology collection, the collection of poems, the anthology of poems, American poems by William Fisher, from which book I discuss. Even when he has mentioned the exact time interval, the exact era from which he selected the poets and writers of the United States of America. He selected Emily Dickinson in that particular interval of years to which she did not belong actually. She came earlier, but he has taken her as someone having the qualities of the later period. See, for example, She was there 1830 to 1886. But the collection, the anthology that you find, talks of the poets and writers after 1886. But we find her name in that list also. So, her poems contain short lines, not very long ones, and they typically lack titles. She does not bother about putting title on that, as we find in Shakespearean sonnets. Generally we try to remember the sonnets with some titles, but see, sonnets of Shakespeare, they are generally known with their sonnet numbers: sonnet number 160, 116, 126. Generally we take the first line of the sonnet and put it as a title. One exception that we find is that of Shakespearean sonnet, that is sonnet number 116, which is known as True Love. That is not the exact first line or the phrase that is used in that poem. So Dickinson does not bother much about titles, so her poems typically lack titles. She often uses slant rhymes as well as unconventional capitalization. See, this is called foregrounding. When a particular writer or a poet, makes some different rules and regulations for their writing, they create new rules, and that is called foregrounding. And when we talk of the literary device which allows them, which gives them liberty, which gives them freedom to take liberty with the forms and the structures, that is called poetic license. So the poetic license gives them freedom to write in whatever manner that suits them, that suits their writing. Dickinson has affinity with Emerson and the Transcendentalists. See, she had affinity, but that doesn't mean that she was writing in a very similar manner. We'll talk about the differences, what Emerson and others had, and what was being had by Dickinson. If in one sentence you want to understand, see, in the approach of Dickinson, Emerson and others, they talk of each and all, means they are more concerned with all. But Dickinson is more concerning with the individuality, with the individuals. When we talk of the affinity with the hymns of New England churches, you can find her poems in the manner of the hymns of New England churches. You know what is hymn? Hymn? This is kind of mantra as we understand in our context. A kind of prayer that they do in churches. Don't you remember that poem by John Donne? A hymn to God the Father? Hymn to God the Father? So her poems have the affinity with the hymns of New England churches, especially the hymns by Isaac Watt, the famous poet for his hymns, Isaac Watt. With the end, see, when we talk of The turns of wit and elliptical metaphors used in Dickinson's poems, they remind us of metaphysical poets. So this is how this is how we find, that is why, or this is how we find that she was like a bundle of talents. Means you can find several traits in her poems, and that is why these all things ultimately makes her the most famous woman poet of United States of America. That's all for today. Now we'll talk the part of it later. Thank you.